Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
We're quickly coming up on 2 years since Skechers threw their hat into the high-end football boot ring. And while we haven't really seen anything new from them other than subtle refreshes since they first launched back in August of 2023, I think it's safe to say that in terms of the fit, feel, and performance characteristics of their high-end products, they might not be popular, but they're undeniably pretty good. With the boots in this box being specifically for the guy that has been steering the ship. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the Harry Kane edition Skechers SKX 1.5 Elite, a very subtle refresh of the boots that Skechers originally launched with for who has been their biggest and main signing to the brand in Harry Kane. Where let's not forget, because I was very critical of this back when these boots first launched, Harry Kane was previously signed to Nike and was comfortably playing in the now discontinued Phantom GT series. It's a well-known fact that Skechers poached several designers from Nike to work on this new football boot project. And of course, would you know it, Harry Kane signs with Skechers, and Skechers has a pair of football boots ready for him that are effectively a copy-paste of that Phantom GT. And that's not to say that football boots from different brands can't be similar to each other, but Skechers as a brand has a reputation for some copying, which I'm just not on board with. But if that's not something that bothers you, or you were just a fan of the Phantom GT that is now discontinued, this SKX 1.5 Elite is actually a really solid pair, and particularly in this new Harry Kane colorway, I think very good looking. However, there is a downside, being that this is limited edition. It does bear a bit of a premium. Normally this boot retails for $225. However, if you want the Harry Kane version, they're gonna run you $250. Which now puts these football boots in the same price range as top-end offerings from the big three. In fact, these are actually more expensive than most of the top-end offerings from Puma. So is it even possible that a pair of Skechers football boots could be worth $250? Well, yes, but also no. Not a great answer, I know, but I'll be explaining my reasoning throughout this review as we go over some of the really cool details of this colorway, talk tech, how they fit and feel on feet, and ultimately how these stack up against all the other fantastic top-end options that are available in the world of football boots in 2025. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, and if you're interested in a pair of these for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. Where, by the way, if you don't care about having this specific colorway, because the SKX isn't the most popular, you can get them very deeply discounted, under $100. Again, check that link down below. And really quickly before we keep going, if you enjoy the content, drop a like on the video, and if you appreciate the unsponsored, brutally honest, unsugar-coated opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified of all my reviews on all the latest football boots of 2025. Before we get into the technical side of things, I do want to take a closer look at some of the really cool details of this signature colorway, where the boots themselves are inspired by Harry Kane's debut season at Bayern Munich, hence the Bayern red, as well as the England white, where you'll notice that there are these little gold pluses throughout the entire boot, and even on parts of the sole plate. There are 36 of those in total, which is the same number of goals that he scored during his debut season. You'll find his signature in gold on the inside of the heel, his full name written out along the back of the heel on the left boot, his HK logo right there on the top of the foot, and then if you look inside of the Skechers S, you can see the HK in the micro texturing. And they even went and put his name and signature on the heel of the insoles with the same design as the upper. I know everyone's not into the whole look of Skechers football boots, including myself, but I have to admit, I actually really like these. As for the performance side of things, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this very much feels like a copy of what the Nike Phantom GT1 and GT2 were. So if you liked those football boots, it is very likely that you're going to be a big fan fan of the SKX. Admittedly, I was not the biggest fan of the Phantom GT series for a couple different reasons, all of which I actually think Skechers have improved upon with the design of the SKX, which is not something that you'd usually expect to hear when one brand copies another. It's almost impossible to replicate the original, and I hate to applaud Skechers for doing this, but given that they have definitely copied the Phantom GT, I do actually think that all the same features are just as good on the Skechers iteration, but they have actually improved the concept in some other areas. Where if we start with the upper, it's made from their fit knit material, which is basically just a knitted upper like we see from so many different brands, but of course, just like the Phantom GT, which had a fly knit base, the main selling point of the Skechers SKX is going to be that micro texture that you have across the entire upper that comes in the form of these little lines just like the Phantom GT, but the addition of these waves as well that almost kind of mimic what a stitching pattern might be on a more traditional pair of football boots, but it's just there to add roughness to the surface, where again, knitted upper with a ton of gritty micro texture on the surface. It's exactly the same concept of the Phantom GT, which again, in itself wasn't particularly original in the grand scheme of football boot technologies. But again, when you take one of their main faces that was wearing the Phantom GT, move him into your brand and effectively give him the exact same football boot, there is absolutely no denying what you tried to do there. Where in all honesty, from a touch and feel perspective, it's a thin knit with a thin liner on the inside and micro texture on the surface. You'd have a hard time telling a difference in feel for the ball when comparing these to the Phantom GT1 or Phantom GT2. So if you like that idea of a thinner knit upper that doesn't necessarily have much in the way of softness or cushion, it's definitely what I would describe as more of a barefoot feel. And then you're getting all of that micro texture on the surface, which does provide grip on the ball by way of grittiness rather than stickiness. Again, this is exactly what the SKX has on offer that we had previously seen on the Phantom GT. Where these do differ, and I would argue actually improve upon the Phantom GT, is in the way that they're shaped and particularly the way that they lace up, where you'll notice that this does have a one-piece upper construction with the central portion of the upper still being made from a knit material, but of course it's an elasticated knit as we see from so many boots with the one-piece construction, but the laces run directly down the middle and run nice and deep, whereas on the Phantom GT they were a little bit more offset and didn't run very deep at all. It was a very shallow lacing system, which created some really ugly bunches and folds in the forefoot area in particular, and even parts of the midfoot, where I just was never a big fan of the overall fit, shaping, and just the way that the upper wrapped your foot on the Phantom GT. Of course, your mileage may vary based on the shape of your feet specifically, but I think going for a more central lacing system that runs a little bit deeper just allows for way better adjustability overall and comfort that is well above average as far as high-end knitted football boots go. In other words, you might not like the way that these look with that giant Skechers S on the side, but once you get these on your feet, there is no denying that they're very comfortable football boots. Moving to the rear, you'll find what is basically a low-cut design. You kind of have that mock collar with this extension of elasticated knit, as well as a little bit of a tail at the very back, but for the most part, it feels like a standard pair of low-cut football boots, although some colorways have actually released in a mid-cut variation. So if you like to have that collar, that is technically an option to you, although not in this particular colorway. Your structure in the heel is coming from an internal plastic heel counter, nice and solid, and then the heel liner, very straightforward, but also very premium in terms of being this really soft microfiber material, plenty of padding all the way through, and generally just great shaping and lockdown. And then if we pull the insole out, this is another thing that I think Skechers does really, really well, arguably better than all of the big brands, and that is the insole, which is made from their hyper burst foam material that is just more dense and more, I'm gonna use the word responsive, but it just feels higher quality than the typical very cheap foam that we're used to seeing on most high-end football boots. And then moving to the base, again, it's very clear that these are heavily Phantom GT inspired as far as their design is concerned, where you have a sole plate base the upper material kind of wrapping over top, and then your stud plate that sits over top with some cutouts in the heel as well as the forefoot. This being their FG stud pattern. You can see the studs themselves fairly straightforward as far as layout is concerned, maybe a little bit more speed boot-esque in terms of the shaping of the studs, more of a blade style under the heel, and then kind of like a hybrid of a blade or round stud in the majority of the studs through the forefoot, other than the support stud in the middle. But in general, the sole plate I would say has more of a solid feel. It's not particularly responsive, but it's also not flimsy either. And as far as bite is concerned, it again trends in the speed boot direction, kind of like the Phantom GT did, but generally just provides really well-rounded traction on firm natural grass playing surfaces. I wouldn't say it's a standout as far as sole plates and stud patterns go on high-end football boots, but it's certainly not near the bottom. And then there's the weight, where I thought it'd be interesting to compare the SKX 1.5 Elite to probably the closest alternative in the Future 8 Ultimate, which is not a very good football boot in my opinion. I've discussed this thoroughly on the channel. Nonetheless, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start with the Pumas, which again, disappointing for a bunch of different reasons. Weight included 9.7 ounces, the equivalent of 275 grams, effectively making them one of, if not the heaviest top-end mainstream model currently on the market. Then we'll throw on the Harry Kane Special, and you can see that they weigh in at a much lighter 8.25 ounces, the equivalent of 234 grams. Where again, if we wanted to compare these to the Nike Phantom GT series, they're a couple grams heavier, but I would say an overall amount of weight that is relatively insignificant to the experience of playing in the boots, and to have that extra weight for the trade-off of better fit and better comfort, I'd actually argue is probably a good thing. They're obviously not the lightest boots out there, but they certainly don't feel heavy. On feet, perhaps unsurprisingly, these feel a lot like the Phantom GT. The upper, while knitted, is still relatively thin and relatively firm because of that smooth synthetic liner that you have on the inside of the boot, but it still has some nice pliability. With the laces tied tight, it wraps your foot very closely, and I think the overall shaping along with that lacing system is why I prefer the fit of the SKX over what the Phantom GT had on offer. These have a little bit more volume and a little bit more width that I would say is more consistent throughout the entire foot, where the Phantom GT had plenty of width and volume through the midfoot and heel, but then tapered very significantly, especially as you got into the toe box area. This definitely has more of that rounded shape, and in general, I just find it more comfortable. There's a little bit more padding to the heel liner. The insole, like I said, provides a little bit of extra cushion that the vast majority of top-end football boots don't necessarily provide. And as long as you like that kind of firmer, I would say more of a thin synthetic feel than a knitted upper feel, then this SKX is pretty much going to be right up your alley. From an overall width perspective, they definitely have some decent width and volume to them, where again, it must be noted that the upper does have decent structure to it, so they're not going to stretch a ton even after some wear time, but I do think they'll work well for most people, even if you do have wider feet. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, the way I see it, there's only one reason why you should run out and buy these boots for anywhere close to the normal retail price, and that is if you are a giant Harry Kane fan, have the money to spend, and you're a little bit worried about not being able to get your size once they've sold a few pairs and have gone on sale. But if that's not you, then it might be worth it to wait a little if this is really the colorway that you're after. If you're less concerned about the colorway though, and you can get past the fact that these do have a giant Skechers S on the side, for those of you that were huge fans of the Nike Phantom GT1 or GT2, to be able to get something that is every bit as good, if not better, on sale for under $100, you're just not going to find anything better for that kind of money. At full price, they're definitely not my favorite control boots, but at over 50% off, the value is undeniable.